Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 33rd episode of Death Row Executions. For today's story, we have Charles Raymond Starkweather, who was a teenage serial killer and was executed at the age of 20 in Nebraska.
Charles, could you please tell me why you killed all them people for?
Well, I know they're going to kill me in the electric chair, and I don't really care because I'm going to be famous for all time, just like my idol James Dean. And I'm looking forward to dying so I could go to heaven and meet my idol James Dean.
You know what? I can hardly wait to see his face. Can you?
And I know I'm crazy, I know I'm a monster, and people, they look at me and they laugh at me and they tell me how ugly and stupid I am all my life, and I'm looking forward to dying so I could go to heaven and meet my idol James Dean.
It was after the Great Depression when Guy and Helen Starkweather gave birth to their third child on November 24, 1938 in Lincoln, Nebraska. Charles Raymond Starkweather was number 3 out of 7 children, and although his family was poor, they were doing better than they were during the Depression, and both of his parents had jobs. Guy had a career as a carpenter, but eventually having a job was on and off for him due to his arthritis. During the times he was not working, Helen, who worked as a waitress, was the only one bringing in any income. There were no reports of abuse at home, and on the contrary, his parents were very attentive to all of their children and were very loving. Charles had a birth defect which caused him to walk bow-legged, and he also had a speech impediment. Despite growing up with these issues and growing up poor, Charles was a good kid and respected his parents. It wasn't until high school when things started to get more difficult for him and he began to act out. He also found out that his bad eyesight was attributed to him being nearsighted, which was undiagnosed for a long time. Many thought he was a slow learner, and while in high school, it was the first time he encountered bullying. He was around 5'3", underweight, and constantly picked on. One of his childhood friends, Bob Van Bush, said that in today's time, Charles would have been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, saying that Charles was only kind to people he liked and hated everyone else. He despised people who made him feel less than and began acting out, not caring who he hurt. Charles later said that after being made fun of when he was younger, his heart turned black and full of rage. He was able to bulk up in weight, so he was now 5'5", 170 pounds, and was able to hurt and bully the bullies who once hurt him. School was of no interest to him anymore, and he dropped out of Lincoln High School at the age of 16. The following year, in 1955, the movie Rebel Without a Cause came out, starring James Dean, and Charles viewed James as his new idol. He began to dress like him, act like him, and even copied some of the same mannerisms. During this time, Charles's best friend Bob Van Bush was dating a girl named Barbara. Barbara had a younger sister named Carol who was 13 years old. Barbara introduced Carol to Charles and the two began dating. Carol was attending a local middle school in Lincoln called Whittier Junior High, and near the school was a newspaper warehouse where Charles decided to start working so that he can be in close proximity to Carol and pick her up from school every day. His work ethics were bad, and his boss at the time said that Charles was the dumbest employee he had. Charles and Carol's relationship became stronger, and one day Charles decided to let Carol drive his car that was registered in his father's name. Carol ended up crashing the car, leaving Guy left to pay for all of the damages. Charles was later kicked out of his family home for refusing to end things with Carol, and he also lost his job at the newspaper warehouse. It was during this time Charles began to hallucinate, claim to have conversations with death, and his hate for society grew. He got a new job as a trash collector and went by 2 mottos: live fast, die young, and dead people are all on the same level. His relationship with Carol was only fuel to his sadistic way of thinking, and soon he would bring his thoughts into fruition. It was November 30th, 1957, 6 days after his 19th birthday, when Charles decided that he wanted to go out and buy Carol a gift. He went to a local gas station with the intention of buying a stuffed animal, and he asked the attendant behind the counter, 21-year-old Robert Colvert, if he could take the stuffed animal and pay at a later date. Robert replied by saying no, which left Charles angry as he stormed out of the gas station empty-handed. Bob Van Bush later recounted that Charles would get enraged for things as simple as him thinking he dressed better than Charles on a particular day. When Charles would get angry, he would fixate on what or who angered him and take things to the extreme. That night, Charles had a hard time sleeping because of his fixation on the gas station attendant, so the following morning at 3 a.m., he decided to return to the gas station with a shotgun he received from Bob's cousin. Charles got out of his car, leaving the weapon inside, and walked inside the gas station, noticing that Robert was still on the clock. He bought some cigarettes, left the gas station, got back in his car, and drove off. When he made it down the road, he decided to make a U-turn and head back to the gas station for the second time that morning. He went inside, leaving his shotgun in the car again, and this time bought a pack of gum and left for his car. Having worked up enough courage, Charles got back in his car and drove down the street. With his mind set, he tied a red bandana over his face, grabbed his shotgun, and then walked back to the gas station. Once inside, he aimed his shotgun at Robert and stole $100 from the register and demanded Robert walk with him to his car. It was very dark, windy, and the temperature was below zero. After making it to his car, Charles drove to a secluded area, forcing Robert to get out. Taking this as his only opportunity, Robert went straight for the weapon and the two of them began to tussle. A shot went off and Robert was shot in both kneecaps. Left defenseless, Charles then got a hold of the gun and aimed for Robert's head. Robert left behind his wife, who was pregnant with their first child. Although denying the murder, he immediately went to Carol and told her of the robbery. He claimed to be a new person and was fueled by his first murder. What happens next has different accounts from Carol's side and Charles's side, but for the sake of this story, I'm going to stick with documented accounts of what happened and Charles's testimony. For anyone interested, Carol's account is out there on the web. A month later, in January 1958, while Carol was still on her way home from school, Charles arrived at her house attempting to make amends with Carol's mother, Velda Bartlett, and stepfather, Marion Bartlett. Carol did not live in the best conditions, and the front yard was filled with trash, so Charles knocked on their back door and was met by Velda, who was angered by his presence. Charles had brought a rifle so that he could go hunting with Marion, but he claims that Velda hit him, so he was angry and left. He drove around town and then returned to get his rifle, but was kicked out by Marion. He left once again and walked to a payphone to call Marion's job, letting them know he would not be in for work for a few days. Charles had his mind set that he was going to hurt them for disrespecting him and for their unwillingness to see his attempts to be cordial. When he made it back to their house, Carol was there, and after she found out about what happened, she began to argue with her mother. Velda began hitting Charles again, and this is when he grabbed the rifle. Marion came out of the room with a hammer, and Charles immediately shot him in the head. Velda then came towards Charles wielding a knife, and she too was shot in the same manner as her husband. Also at the house was Carol's 2-year-old half-sister Betty Jean, who was crying due to all of the commotion. Charles hit her with the end of the rifle, which only made her scream and cry louder. Charles walked away, grabbing the knife that Velda tried to use on him, and he threw it at Betty Jean, which landed directly in her throat. After killing the family, Charles and Carol moved the bodies to different locations. Velda was pushed down the toilet opening of an outhouse in the backyard, and Betty Jean was put inside of a box and placed in the outhouse as well. Marion was dragged and left in the family's chicken coop. After hiding the bodies, Carol spent her time cleaning up the mess, while Charles wrote a note on the door that said, "Stay away, everybody is sick with the flu," and signed it Velda Bartlett. Charles and Carol stayed in the house for nearly a week and received quite a few visitors, but each time someone knocked on the door, they would be met by Carol, who told them her parents could not come to the door because they were sick. Police received a call from Bob Van Bush, who was now married to Carol's sister Barbara, because when the couple came to visit, Carol began crying, telling them they had to leave and could not come inside. When police arrived at the house, they quickly left because they believed Carol when she told them the only reason Bob called them was because he did not like her family. Police then told Bob and his wife Barbara that there was nothing to worry about. On January 27, 1958, Carol's grandmother Pansy grew weary of not hearing from the family and began to get angry when Carol denied her entry. "If you don't open this door this second, I'm going to go to town and get a search warrant. You've got Chuck in there with you, and don't try to tell me you don't." Pansy decided to go in town to get authorities, and when Lincoln police arrived, the two teenagers escaped and fled the scene. Driving in Charles's 1949 Ford, the couple drove 30 minutes away from Belmont to Bennett, Nebraska. They finally made it to a farm owned by a 70-year-old man named August Meyer. August was a quiet man who never married and only kept his land so that his mother would have a place to stay. He was friendly to everyone in the community and would allow people, including the Starkweather family, to come on his property to hunt. Guy and his sons, including Charles, would often visit the farm, so August initially thought nothing of about Charles coming on his property. Charles got his shotgun, and after killing August, he and Carol stole money and food. They tried to flee the scene, but their Ford got stuck in mud, so they had to abandon their car. Not too soon after ditching their car, a young couple driving by spotted them and decided to pull over and offer help. 17-year-old Robert Jensen and his 16-year-old girlfriend Carol King let Charles and Carol into their car, thinking they were going to lend a helping hand. Charles had other plans and forced Robert to drive to an abandoned storm shelter. Once there, Charles raped Carol, fatally shot Robert, and then Carol shot and killed Carol King. They then drove from Bennett back towards Lincoln in a wealthier part of town. They stopped at the house owned by a rich industrialist, Chester Lauer Ward. Living there was his wife Clara and their maid Lillian Fensel. When the couple broke into their home, they were met by Clara and Lillian, who were immediately fatally stabbed by both Carol and Charles. Charles and Carol decided to stay in the house and wait for Chester to come home. When Chester finally arrived later that night, Charles shot him to death. The Wards and Lillian died on January 28, 1958. Charles and Carol took valuables along with expensive jewelry from the home and stole Chester's 1956 Packard 400 and fled. News of the multiple homicides within close proximity alarmed Lancaster County, Nebraska, and police began to search each house in an attempt to locate the killers. The Nebraska Army National Guard was also sent to help the community by patrolling the streets. They were armed with machine guns, and people in the community also began carrying guns while out in public. During the chaotic panic in Lincoln, Charles and Carol also panicked and drove over 6 hours away to the state of Wyoming. Knowing that police would be on the search for the vehicle they stole from Chester, they abandoned it and began to look for a new one. It was now January 29, 1958, and a man named Merle Collison had pulled his Buick over onto the shoulder of the highway. He was a traveling salesman and was too sleepy to continue his drive, so he decided to take a nap. Charles and Carol spotted his car, tapped on the window, waking him up, and Charles demanded for him to get out. Merle refused, and that is when he was shot for the first time. The gun jammed, and once it was fixed, Carol fired the fatal and final blow. The couple was excited by murder, and both said that the other was trigger-happy. They got into Merle's Buick and tried to speed off. What Charles did not expect was the Buick having a push-pedal emergency brake. Charles was not familiar with it, and the car stalled. He got out of the car to try and restart the engine when a man named Joe Springle spotted the car and decided to pull over and offer his help. Charles asked Joe to help him release the emergency brake in the car, and that is when Joe noticed Merle's dead body. When Joe backed up, he was met by Charles, who was now equipped with his shotgun, aiming for Joe. Joe was a little over 6 feet and much stronger than Charles, and the two began to wrestle for the gun, and Joe was able to gain possession of the gun. At that moment, a deputy sheriff for Natrona County, Wyoming, noticed the two were fighting and pulled up behind the vehicles. When Carol noticed the police officer, she ran from the car to the sheriff and screamed, "He's going to kill me, he's crazy, he just killed a man." Charles then got into the black Packard he initially intended to ditch and led the deputy on a high-speed chase. Charles was going over 100 miles an hour, and once local authorities were notified of the chase and who was behind the wheel, they set up roadblocks in Douglas, Wyoming. A neighboring county sheriff by the name of Earl Heflin fired towards Charles, and one of the bullets went through the back window. Charles immediately stopped the car and was met by more bullets as he also returned fire. He ran out of bullets and surrendered, and some of the glass that flew from the rear window cut his ear and hand, which scared him. Sheriff Heflin made a statement when asked why he thought Charles surrendered. "I guess he thought he was bleeding to death. That's the kind of yellow SOB he is." The very next day, Charles was charged with first-degree murder for his crime against Merle Collison. That murder happened in the state of Wyoming, but officials said that they would be extraditing Charles back to Nebraska. The governor of Wyoming at the time, Millward Simpson, said that despite Charles's crimes, he was an opponent of the death penalty and would commute his sentence of death to life in prison. After hearing the governor's views, that is when authorities deferred the case to Nebraska. One attorney said, "How can I dare try the man here, knowing the governor has come out against capital punishment?" Governor Millward Simpson signed the papers for Charles's extradition soon after his capture. By January 31st, Charles was back in Nebraska, and his trial started in May. Initially, Charles said that he committed all of the murders, but during trial said that Carol was his accomplice. He pled insanity, but he was found to be sane, and less than a month after his trial began, Charles was sentenced to death by method of electrocution. Charles was quoted saying, "If I want to make my atonement with God and be electrocuted, that's my business." Before execution day, Charles was offered steak to eat as his last meal, but he decided to eat cold slices of cooked deli meat. June 25, 1959 was Charles Raymond Starkweather's execution day at Nebraska State Penitentiary. He was 20 years old and was pronounced dead just 1 minute after midnight. After the death of Charles, many people vandalized his headstone. Years later, an actor by the name of Martin Sheen starred in the movie Badlands and portrayed Charles, so he decided to pay for a new headstone at the Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska. 5 of Charles's victims are buried in the same cemetery. Now for discussion and question time. After listening to a portion of Charles's interview on how he was really unable to answer the questions properly, and also how he spelled the forged note about the Bartlett family being sick, do you feel that he truly did have a learning disability, and this question is unrelated to his crimes and sentencing? Have any of you ever tried to prevent your children from being in a relationship with someone who was not good for them, but there was nothing you could do to keep them away from each other? 5 of Charles's victims were buried in the same cemetery as him. I know once in the grave you won't know who you're next to and it would be the last of your worries, but don't you think while still living it would be hard to visit the cemetery of your loved one when their killer was in the same vicinity?